Tipatat Chennavasin is the co-founder at the Virtual Reality Fund. He's a speaker, mentor, investor, advisor, and the best part is you also build content, right? You also build interactive and immersive content. So for my listeners who don't know much about you, can you share a brief on you and what as an investor caught your interest in AR, VR, MR?
Sure. And we're actually called the Venture Reality Fund, not the Virtual Reality Fund. A lot of people confuse that, but we call it the Venture Reality Fund because we always wanted to invest in virtual reality and augmented reality. And we, again, feel that spatial computing is really the next computing platform. So, again, thank you for having me on. Really excited to talk with you and promote or explain, kind of some of the things that I've been seeing and share some of the wisdom I've gained for the past 4 years of investing in the space. But my journey actually started as an artist and designer. So I come from being a 3D artist, self-taught, working in games and interactive entertainment. I studied human-computer interaction design or UX at Stanford University. I really just fell in love with the idea of how computers were evolving as a platform or as a medium and everything that it enabled. I think I like to think of it as computers first started as computation engines. Now we've turned into communication engines, and now we're going to become reality engines. And that's really the evolution of what I see this technology becoming, and the digital world kind of merging with the analog world in a more naturalistic way. So for me, I was always just drawn to interactive gaming. I always felt like that was, animation was the first sense of like magic I ever saw, where you could just take still images and breathe life into them. But then with gaming, like you could actually make them interactive, you could control them and manipulate them. And so seeing like as this canvas to create magic on, I think virtual reality, when I tried it in the 80s, and how it's always talked about in literature, science fiction, and movies, always was the promise, the dream. And then when Oculus had their Kickstarter, it really was like, okay, is this finally possible? We've been burnt so many times. But John Carmack, who is like the gaming graphics, gaming engine god, if he says that this is something worth checking out, it's definitely something I want to check out. So I backed the Kickstarter, I got it. And especially with the DK2 and eventually later on with the HTC Vive, like virtual reality was even more amazing than I ever dreamt it was going to be. And again, as my background as a designer, developer, prototyper, artist, I started making experiments, just simple experiments to just kind of push what I think could be interesting in this new medium. And one of the experiences was, of course, trying to recreate scenes from my favorite movie, The Matrix. And instead of watching the movie, you get to live the movie. You are Neo. You talk to Morpheus as he takes you on this kind of immersive presentation that the world is an illusion. And then you do things like, dodge bullets in bullet time and jump over buildings. And so, just trying to make a fun, simple experience with a couple friends of mine, nights and weekends, just for the heck of it. And this was for the DK2. So, we weren't worried about like copyright infringement because we weren't going to charge. This is just something that we wanted to do as fans, and also to kind of see what VR could be. And in the process of making, a fun experience, I accidentally cured myself of my real life fear of heights. And so I actually hacked my brain. And that really just showed me the power of VR, and that this wasn't just going to be about gaming, that this was going to have profound implications for how we learn, how we train, how we heal, how we work, so many different areas. And so that's when I decided I wanted to go all in on this technology and this platform and medium, and really kind of see what it could do and what it could become.
Lovely. How cool is that? So like you, my background has been in the media space. But basically, I started as a musician. So I have played for a rock band for 15 years. I've composed for Bollywood feature films. So I have a audio production studio and a video production studio. So I build basically content for advertising agencies, production houses and stuff like that. Back in 2016, a client of mine asked me if I could get into virtual reality, if I could build VR content for them. And these guys were like a pretty big company. And that's when I actually discovered VR. And from that point of time, I actually stopped music, because I think the virtual reality is like a rabbit hole, if you, the more you get inside, the deeper it takes you. And like you, I am my favorite movie happens to be Matrix, right? So yes, I mean the plot of the movie is so super awesome, and the more you discover VR, like you said, I mean it cured you of the fear of the phobia of your height. Now VR is in such a nascent stage, but it's so profound because it's not just for entertainment and gaming. I mean, it is at this point in time, but what it can do is unfathomable at this point in time, because even right now, when it's in such a nascent stage, it tricks your motor cortex, so
Yep.
so I I I spend my time thinking of the future. What will it be able to do in maybe another 15 years, maybe a 30 years, maybe a 50 years? How a world will transform with this technology. So that's the reason I got into it, and I'm super excited about it. And that's the reason I've been push driving the ecosystem and evangelizing India about AR, VR, MR. So today, presently, we are all confined to homes because of COVID-19, right? And VR has all the capabilities locked into it to, push drive the conversation when it comes to remote work, remote healthcare, remote education, remote media, remote everything, right? But we seem to have missed the opportunity which this natural disaster presented, right? So somehow, if you see, your 2D platforms like Zoom and others have still capitalized on this opportunity, wherein virtual reality, which holds that entire potential to transform remote work, is somehow, I feel, it's my personal opinion, I could be completely wrong, do kindly correct me, and do kindly share your views.
Well, you're not completely wrong, but I think part of it too is like just look at the realities of where we're at, right? Like, we're hardware constrained. There's definitely not enough headsets in the marketplace, and there's been a huge demand for headsets. But Facebook in their calls, in their earnings calls, have said they just can't make enough of them, right? They're selling as many as they can make. And COVID has actually impacted a lot of the supply chain that affects not just VR but all consumer electronics, or just all products in general, and the manufacturing lines that depend on Asia and are kind of global. And so so in that one sense, we are not seeing like crazy huge adoption. But then what's really interesting though is that we are seeing adoption where it matters, and for the people that have it, we're seeing increased usage. So a couple of interesting things, especially on the enterprise side, right? Like we have Ford. They continue to do design work, doing remote work and remote collaboration using VR tools, right? Like, so that's showing like, okay, like, even in this pandemic, people have to work from home. There are certain jobs that they can't do over Zoom, and those are the ones that really depend on. So, I don't think, again, it's a one size fits all. VR is going to replace Zoom. It's like, no, we still have, regular phone meetings, even like audio meetings. We don't always make everything a video meeting even, right? Like, so it's like figuring out where it matters or where it makes the difference and kind of see how it's working. And for me too, I look at like, what's the engagement, retention, what's the long-term usage? And we're just seeing amazing usage patterns for the people, again, where it's more about collaboration and less about communication. But then on the other side, on the consumer side, it's been very, very amazing to see as well, because now, there are enough headsets out there that the software market for VR, consumer software market, by the end of last year was over $300 million. And
Right.
what's really great about that is, we can see a hit VR game make over $60 million. I honestly think that, doing the projection, doing the math, we should see our first VR title making $100 million by the end of this year. And it might be even 2 different titles. Like, that's amazing, right? So, when we say, where are we in this industry and in this journey, right? Like, I think a lot of people always expect things to go faster, faster, faster. But I always kind of took this as we're the beginning of this journey, and it's not an upgrade. It's a shift, right? So we're not going from phones to smartphones. We're going from no phones to phones. We're going from no PCs to PCs. We're going from no VR to VR, right? And so what we're seeing is, again, this is a much bigger journey. But one way I would look at this, talking about those numbers, especially for consumer adoption, right? Going back to the smartphones, right? I feel like most people would agree Angry Birds was that watershed moment for smartphone gaming. when Angry Birds succeeded, everyone said, yes, mobile gaming on the smartphone was going to be a thing, going to be a huge industry, and that people should really, invest in it and, build in it. And, we look back at the iPhone, and it was 3 years until there was an Angry Bird, right? Like 3 years after the release of the first iPhone. And it made it was like 7.5, I would say, let's say 9 to 10 million adjusted for inflation. It made about 10 million its first year, Angry Birds. And that was enough to prove that the mobile phone smart gaming industry was going to be big. So 3 years into VR's consumer life cycle since the launch of consumer VR with the Oculus Rift. And again, I just want to be very clear too. When I talk about VR, I specifically talk about 6 degrees of freedom VR, because I think that's very important to have 6 degrees of freedom head tracking, and then the 6 degrees of freedom, where are my controllers? Hand tracking, which is so crucial to create enough functionality to create sticky experiences. But so 3 years into the launch of consumer VR, a tiny company that was self-published called Beat Games, they made a game called Beat Saber. It did 20 million in its first year.
Right.
And so when people are like, oh, hey, VR is struggling, VR is dead, I'm like, hey, if an unheard of team from the Czech Republic can make a huge hit, make over 20 million its first year, doubling that, making over 40 million its second year, and then get acquired by Facebook, that's amazing. And so, again, we're still early, but we're seeing tremendous signs of adoption, traction, growth. Now, is this $1 trillion business overnight? No. But has there ever been $1 trillion business overnight? No. And again, I think people are waiting for the VR's, iPhone moment. But again, if we think about this, isn't, the first VR devices to come out were more like the Motorola brick phone. And it's going to be a long journey till we get to that iPhone ubiquity. But at the same time, we're seeing huge successes. We're seeing, companies making real money. We're seeing, millions of people now being trained in VR every year by Walmart and DHL and other, Fortune 500 companies. So I feel like VR has already proven itself beyond the point where people can say, oh, VR is dead, or, oh, hey, VR, isn't it like 3D TV? We're like, no.
Thank you for being so detailed. And yes, I completely am with you. I mean, I do understand, since I'm vested in the space, I know about this potential and what I can do. Yes, I do know that there is a little bit of over expectation from a technology which is still in a nascent stage, but I guess that is a human tendency, right? So just right now, I heard that Roni Abovitz, Magic Leap CEO, is stepping down, right? A little disturbing, but do you think this is going to shake up the perception? What I mean is, they recently laid off their
1,000 people.
Yeah, the 1,000 odd people, right? Yep. And Magic Leap was that company where, wherever you talk to, I mean, wherever you go, your conference, or, you talk, you give an example about AR, VR, you say, oh, that was Magic Leap, $4 billion funding without a prototype and things like that. So there was this huge hype. Now, suddenly that thing is completely crashed out. Do you think this is going to mess around with the perception of what general of people might have about AR, VR?
No. I mean, honestly, when we think back about smartphones, right? Do you remember a company called General Magic? It was a huge company that believed in pocket computing, pretty much everything that would become a smartphone, right? They were the, big pioneers. They, huge vision, big IPO, failed, and is written out of the history books now, right? No one really knows about it. But again, that team, Andy Rubin, who was the father of Android, was working at General Magic. So there's a lot of that DNA. Even though it kind of quote unquote flamed out as a business, the what it did, the revolution that it started, lived on, through its the talent that it had put through its doors, and all of the kind of pioneering efforts that it had done. I mean, in the same way, I would look at, okay, the Apple Newton. Who remembers the Apple Newton, right? Everyone's like, oh my God, what a disaster by, a pretty big company at the time. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And Apple is fine. iPhone exists. Like, so it's like their products are going to fail, right? Not every product wins, and not every company can succeed no matter how much they raise. I think it just shows again how hard this is to do.
Right.
And, I think right now, I think a lot of people are, backseat quarterbacking, armchair quarterbacking, or Magic Leap and what they're doing. And it's hard. Like, they needed a lot of money to try to do what they did. The product, definitely didn't live up to a lot of the hype and the expectations that they set. But, at the same time, they actually brought a product out to market. They did what, they did something, right? They moved the conversation forward. And it's not like they were the only one. I mean, honestly, they were probably one of the smallest players in the VR AR ecosystem, right? If you think about who they were competing against, they're competing against Facebook, they're competing against Google, they're competing against Microsoft, they're competing against Apple. So, it's tough. Like, I don't want to diminish, I appreciate their vision. I appreciate the hard work, and there are a lot of great, talented folks there, right? And I think, again, their failure, I don't want to take it lightly, but at the same time, it's not, they weren't the, everyone didn't look at them and say, oh yeah, they are absolutely the kings and this is it, and this is our one shot for AR. No. I mean, if anyone that tried HoloLens, and especially HoloLens 2, realized, I mean, Microsoft's in this to win this. And you look at what Facebook has been doing too, like, everything that they've invested into Oculus, and bringing that, and then now, as they were talking about, like, showing off that remote work with the mixed reality, you're like, yes, this is their aspirations. It's not just VR, it's for the whole VR AR spectrum of spatial computing. And you can see magically struggling because they haven't failed yet. They're pivoting. Roni left, but they did raise more money. They're pivoting enterprise. We'll see how they do. But at the same time, it's like, that's not stopping any of these other giant technology companies from doing it. That's not stopping a bunch of startups creating applications and winning customers and making revenue. So. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So yes, I mean, there are some startups over here who are doing some crazy stuff, and you never know. I mean, maybe some small startup from here could, or anywhere around the world, could do some, could be the next big company in the AR VR space. So COVID-19 has impacted everyone at this point in time. So what do you think is the general sentiment of investors? Are they going to be waiting and watching? Are they going to be investing? Because I was just talking to a friend of mine who's an investor, and he just invests in future tech, not just in the VR space. And he takes the complete opposite approach. So his line is, when the world is zigging, I zag, right? So I mean, if you see, I mean, in 2008 also, when there was a downturn, there are a lot of people who turned millionaires by doing the opposite. So what is your sentiment? And what is the general sentiment that you see among your peers, when it comes to investing in the AR VR space during COVID?
Sure. I mean, I think at the same time, I don't think it's, I think one way I would think about it too is this, like, people, because we're going through COVID right now, we're not done with it yet. We have no idea when this pandemic is going to end, right? We don't know when the vaccine is going to be available. We don't know when the new normal, what that really is going to look like. How many people are going to be permanently working from home versus how many people are, just temporarily working from home, right? Like, so because we have all these unknowns, we can't really make any kind of strong, oh yeah, this is the future we have to build or plan for, right? But I think we can, so because of that uncertainty, I think it's much harder to say, okay, everyone's, yes, we know what we're going to do, or we know what we need to build for. But I think we can look at some trends that were happening and see that COVID has accelerated those trends. Like, remote work was something that was trending up anyways, right? And then COVID accelerated it. And then, it'll probably go back down, but the plateau of the new normal will still probably be more remote work than before, right? And still trending towards more remote work. So, investors, I think, aren't saying, hey, we need to invest in VR, we need to invest in AR, but they're saying, hey, we need to look at solutions that solve these problems. And if VR is the right solution for certain remote work, absolutely, or for remote training, absolutely. And what's great is what we're seeing is it's being validated. We're seeing, VR being used to train the doctors with the latest, COVID, COVID preparedness techniques, or the newest ways to treat or interact in a COVID world in the hospital. And especially for a lot of these med students that are being pushed early to become doctors, or a lot of these retired doctors who don't know the latest protocols having to come back to work, or also too, like a lot of doctors in different practices that hadn't gone to the ER or hadn't done ICU work and now have to. Like, so we're seeing VR being essential for training that. You know, we're also seeing AR being essential for life sciences. One of our portfolio companies are called Apprentice. They have a remote collaboration solution for pharmaceutical labs, and they're actually being used to help develop COVID vaccines.
Nice.
And so, you know, what I would say, you know, again, is I think this time what I'm seeing at least is, you know, there are a lot of ideas that no longer makes, or that, yeah, definitely that no longer makes sense now. There are a lot of ideas that may make sense, but it's uncertain. But then there's definitely some ideas that, oh my gosh, they're so needed in this new world moving forward. And so I feel like those investments are going into those ideas, and some of them happen to be VR and AR, not all of them, of course. But, you know, again, it's about saying, you know, it's not just about the technology, really, it's about this problem that you're solving.
Right, right. And so I've been talking to a lot of people, you know, I mean, besides this podcast, I also run another podcast called Change Transform India, where I interact with, you know, people who are driving the future tech conversation, right? So yes, I mean, somehow all have been extremely positive because they see that this has actually accelerated digital, you know, forward, you know, education industry, you know, be it enterprise or, you know, there are people over here who are you know, for first we were saying, okay, let's just get electric vehicles over here, but then there are this group of people who are trying to push like autonomous vehicles, and there's drones for delivery and stuff like that. So yes, I mean, at least they are now, you know, saying, okay, I mean, you know, we can do this right now rather than waiting. So yeah, it looks exciting. You know, it looks like an exciting time. So you know, you mentioned about Beat Saber. So congratulations on that. You know, I mean, that's a portfolio company, right? So it got acquired. So can you talk a little bit more about your portfolio companies besides Beat Saber? I believe Alchemy Labs also has been acquired. So are there any further immediate acquisitions that you would like to share with them?
Unfortunately, nothing that I can talk about, but you know, I do think it's interesting where, you know, Alchemy Labs with Job Simulator, they made the first successful VR hit game, and they were acquired by Google, and that was Google's first time acquiring a game studio. And then you know, Beat Saber was the first, or the second successful hit VR game, and then they were Facebook's first gaming acquisition, which is kind of crazy. I think subsequently Facebook acquired another gaming company, but you know, just to think again that these are interesting opportunities now that a lot of times people wouldn't have really thought about before. That, oh, game companies being acquired, especially, you know, especially by a Facebook and a Google, by major technology companies, that was pretty unheard of. But yeah, the things I would really take though are that these are indie teams, right? Like, these aren't big, huge funded studios, you know, and this is the message I really want to get to your audience as well. Like, the story about Beat Saber that I think, again, is so important to understand is originally developed by a core team of 3 devs in the Czech Republic. They had no connections to Oculus, no connections to Valve or HTC or anyone. You know, they just were passionate you know, app developer making great, very artistic and well-designed mobile games, but never had a big hit before, right? But they were really good, talented team, working hard. They worked on Beat Saber. They took a core idea and they just polished it, refined it, and made it beautiful. And what's really interesting about it is they use this idea of early access. On Steam, you can launch a game, and it doesn't have to be a full game. It can be a beta, and it didn't have to be feature complete. You know, if you had come to me and said, hey, Tipatat, I want to pitch you a game to fund, or a game studio to fund. The first game they're going to build is a music rhythm game. It's going to have 10 unlicensed songs created by the CEO, and it's just single player. I would be like, wow, that doesn't sound like enough of a game, right? Like, most music games are 40 levels with your favorite artist, and it has to have multiplayer, right? Like, that's the bare minimum, right? But with just that small feature set, that they refined and polished great VR first gameplay and built something so beautiful, and then made fantastic mixed reality marketing videos that went viral. When they launched, I think within the first week or two, they'd already made $1 million. Within the first month, they'd made $2 million. So, you know, that's a success that, if it can come from the Czech Republic, self-published, it could come from anywhere, right?
Right. Right.
It could come from Bombay, it could come
Right.
from Singapore, it could come from Bangkok, right? Like that possibility of, and the market's only grown since, right? Like that was 2 years ago. Now the market's even bigger. And again, we're seeing success. Most of so when we look at the market, right? Last year there was about 300 million in software revenue, and what that represents though is there's over 100 developers or 100 titles that have made over $1 million in revenue, and most of those titles had budgets of under $1 million, so they were break even or profitable. Like, especially when you compare it to something like mobile. In mobile gaming, right now, there's 1,000 apps, 1,000 games being launched every day. And unless you have $1 million a month marketing spend, no one's even going to download your game. But Beat Saber, with just less than $1 million, probably less than $500,000 of development budget, no marketing spend, able to make $2 million in a month. So seeing again where that's going and and how big that's become. I feel like again that's the blueprint that I would say other developers should really look at is build a VR first game. Don't overbuild. Use early access. Get it out there. See if people respond to it. And if people don't like playing it, if people aren't engaging with it, move on to the next idea. But definitely don't just think about what it means to be a VR first game. Don't and the takeaway too I would say is it's not about saying, hey, I need to make another music rhythm game or I need to make a slicing game. Like when I looked at Alchemy Labs, I feel like with Job Simulator, they share in their DNA a lot of the same ideas that then Beat Saber took to the next level with, a very, pure VR first design, right? Like gameplay that only works in VR, that feels good in VR. And then using that kind of mixed reality videos, having game that's infinitely replayable, but easy to understand, easy to pick up, not trying to be like the other games, not trying to be a first person shooter, not trying to be, some racing car game that, don't do like zig when other people are zagging, right? Like do something
Right.
different. And I feel like they really nailed it. And so, I feel like the next big hit in VR from an indie studio, it won't look like a Beat Saber. It won't look like an Alchemy, but I think it'll take a lot of those ideas of like rich, that deep gameplay design, satisfactory gameplay design. That's VR first, VR native. And then, I think that again is not all you need, but the majority of what you need to make a hit.
Right, right. I think simplicity works. And what this shows is that, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a hardworking entrepreneur, you don't really need big funds. You just need a great idea. You need to keep it simple and basic. And you could be sitting in any part of the world. And you at this point in time, because of internet, it
Yeah.
gives the resources to get in touch with whoever and build your company and build your idea. And yes, I mean, there's millions waiting out there. So tell me, as an investor, what
Mhm.
gets you most excited, in a startup?
Sure. I think this is also why I love VR and AR. It's like you try it. And if you try it and you have a visceral reaction to it, you're like, okay, this is special. This feels unique. And what I think, again, I kind of said this before, but VR native, or where VR is the difference maker, and this applies to enterprise applications too. Like when we did an investment in a company called Vivid Vision, they actually do corrective eye therapy. They strengthen your eyesight in VR. And what's really amazing is, so the founder, he had diplopia or lazy eye, and so that means one eye is strong, one eye is weak.
Right.
So currently the way you treat that is you take a piece of paper and you do these eye exercises. You look around, right? But that only works when you're a juvenile, when you're a kid. When you're an adult, that method of curing yourself no longer helps. So the founder, created a VR version of the eye exercises, essentially, and eye tests, and was able to cure himself of his own diplopia, and then tested it. And what they found was that this new methodology, of course, it worked for kids and worked better than the traditional tests, but it also worked for adults who couldn't be cured by the traditional tests. So that's where, again, like VR does the impossible. Like
Right.
it's great if it makes it faster and cheaper, but it's best when it does something that couldn't have been done before.
Right. Right. Yeah. So what are your views on the India market or the Asia market? I'm sure. I mean, you have you been to India? Have you ever been to
No,
India?
honestly, I've never been to India. Yeah, I just haven't had a chance or an opportunity to go. Hopefully, when things calm down, and maybe I'll be able to come visit. But I go to Southeast Asia a lot, which is fairly close, and I go to
Right.
China pretty often.
Right.
Uh, but one of the things I see too is the ecosystems. They're just early. It's there's not much support from the hardware companies to do
Right.
adoption, right? Like
Right.
in India and in some of these other markets, and so I think that makes it hard.
Right.
Um, I think as well as again, if you don't have access to dev kits, it's hard for you to build on top. It's hard to like show people what you're doing, and that. But I think the need is definitely there. I think the opportunity to make something really big is definitely there. But and again, I'm not as familiar with any, but when I look at the Thailand ecosystem and Southeast Asia, I kind of also feel like too, like there's like still going through the smartphone e-commerce revolution, and so it's like, do they really want to focus on the next thing when they're still doing the current thing, and that's still big and booming? Whereas at least in the U.S., the smartphone revolution is pretty mature now, and so that way it's more compelling for early stage entrepreneurs to go find the next platform. Does that
Right.
make
Right.
sense?
Yeah, yeah, completely. So yes, I mean, India. I'll just give you a little brief on the India market over here. So
Yeah, please.
yeah, 1.3 billion people, right? It's a huge market opportunity. Geo happens to be the biggest telecom company over here, and what they've done, they've gotten the price point of data to almost like a couple of cents, right? So the connectivity has happened all over India. We've got 1.3 billion people, and currently I believe that we're close to around 600 or 700 odd people who are connected to internet, right, with high speed bandwidth. So things are looking good over here. Geo has got into virtual reality. They're building their own MR headset. They're building uh, 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 they're building gaming, they're creating content. And besides that, I'm just going to give you a lowdown what's happening in India.
Yeah,
So,
no,
so
this is great.
yeah, so there's this music director called A.R. Rahman. I'm sure you must have heard about him. He's done the music score for Slumdog Millionaire, and he's one of the biggest music composers over here. So he's directed, produced a VR film called Le Mask, and he partnered with Intel and Kaleidoscope for that. And besides that, there are these Bollywood feature films. Now, Bollywood is huge, right, over here. So cricket is a religion, so is Bollywood. So in the Bollywood space, there are these some of the like the biggest grossing film of all time called Bahubali uh, had a VR edit. There are other small indie films like Phobia had a VR edit. So many, people are like kind of exploring that, though we lack the partnership with the West to like create like really cutting edge VR content. We are all trying to explore. I myself got into VR in 2016, early 2016, and since there was lack of accessibility of getting the right tools to build content, we built our own 18 camera stereoscopic rig. We built our own robotic dolly. Back then, I think in early 2016, Google was building their 16 camera array Odyssey. We
Sure.
added top down bottom, and we built it that point of time. So yes, I think it's slowly and steadily it's moving. Like I said, I mean, there are quite a lot of gaming studios are adopting AR VR. There is Bollywood who's looking at AR VR. Enterprise obviously is looking at AR VR in a big way. And I personally am push driving the ecosystem because I see that if only the ecosystem is there, we'll be able to sustain this. Would you be open to advising, mentoring, or investing in Indian startups post you understand the
Sure.
ecosystem?
Yeah, of course, I'm always happy to talk to anyone and give advice and learn from you as well. So I'm always open to talking with entrepreneurs globally. On the investment side, it gets a little tricky. Like a lot of times too, when we invest globally, we like to have a local partner, VC partner, because again, we don't understand a lot of corporate governance of Indian startups, right? Like so we'd want someone that's kind of closer to the ground to help us understand and navigate that, and especially if you're hitting the Indian market, which is something that we don't understand at all. So yeah, again, we would look for the right partners to kind of help us, at least on the investment side. But in terms of just knowledge share and seeing what works and seeing what's not working, always happy to talk to entrepreneurs and anyone I can be helpful to.
So to the startups who are listening, and to the ones who are like clueless on how to get funding, can you explain how pitching works, when to approach an investor, how to do valuation, term sheets, legalities, and the
Sure.
nuances to get an investor excited?
Sure. Again, I think you got to understand too, there's no one size fits all answer. I'll give you some general guidelines, but there's always push and pull. But the basics of it again is like, when do you approach an investor? I think is probably one of the most important questions. And what type of investor, I think, is also very important as well. So you have different classes of investors. I would start with friends and family and angel investors. Those are the first tier investors that kind of help you when you have an idea and you want to build a prototype, right? Once you've built that prototype, then an MVP or not even an MVP, but once you prove a prototype or a tech demo that shows that you're capable of realizing parts of your vision, that you can build something that you eventually you'll take to market, that's when you'll approach incubators, accelerators, and seed funds, right? Then once you have a product that's kind of in the market and getting some early traction, that's when you start interacting with more institutional investors, like Series A investors, and of course there are investors like us that do seed and Series A, right? So you do the early stage, you talk to early stage investors. Then once you start having millions of revenue, especially on the software, on the enterprise side, like ARR revenue, that's when you're really going to do your either a proper Series A or a later stage. That's when you start doing even bigger investments, right? And that's kind of the journey, the types of investors you talk to, kind of where you are in terms of the product cycle and market fit, right? The other things, when you're talking about, okay, what are terms, what are valuations? Those are always kind of, especially before you make any revenue, it's always a little bit of what the market will bear. But it's also, a factor of, your experience, your team, what have you done before, right? The market opportunity, how much do you need to make this happen, essentially, right? And in terms of like how you raise, what are the terms, what do you want to do? I think Y Combinator has a lot of great resources, and I would use that. They have a nice kind of safe note for the very early stages. Also, I don't know what type of banking services they have for entrepreneurs, but in the US, we have tons of banks that are very entrepreneur friendly, especially tech entrepreneur friendly. Like Silicon Valley Bank is a great one, a bunch of others as well. But they all kind of have best practices, standard docs for all of those, raising convertible note, raising safe, or raising actual equity rounds.
So tell me, how excited are you of the future of XR, and what's your moonshot?
Honestly, I'm so excited. I feel like right now, especially with the Quest, I feel like Quest is re-energized. It's really the first true consumer XR device, first XR device in public. Because again, 6 degrees of freedom head tracking, 6 degrees of freedom hand tracking. It's great for gaming, but we're also seeing it being used for surgical training, vision therapy, for data visualization. I mean, there's so many different applications. It is, a lot of what we were hoping for, when we dreamed of what VR could be. And, I think the only problem I think is, Facebook can't make enough of them, and there are not enough companies competing with Facebook to make this more accessible to everyone. So, I hope that, especially in markets like India and others, that the major technology or telco players that are thinking about headsets, go into the market, work with Qualcomm, use their reference design, make sure it has 6 degrees of freedom head tracking and hand tracking, so you can actually do more. It needs to be more than just a display. It needs to be an input device. It needs to be a computing platform. And that's when we're going to unlock a lot more use cases. And in terms of moonshots or just things I'm excited about, honestly, my big wish for VR is that, this is a problem that we're kind of seeing in the US in particular, but I think there's this digital divide. People that participate in the digital economy are doing better than the people that are not. And the digital economy, because it's not resource constrained, it's really just imagination constrained, right? Like, we think about more and more people are working in the digital economy, right? The interface to doing digital work today is a keyboard and mouse, maybe a Wacom digitizing pen, right? But it's like working with 2D interfaces to interact a lot of times with 3D digital worlds. It just makes no sense, or it's just harder to do. Now, if we could interact with the digital world in a natural way, using VR, we have perfect one-to-one gesture manipulation, right? We see the world in a natural way in VR. We move around. We want to get closer to something. We don't scroll and wheel a mouse. We just actually lean forward, right? Like, that's the way the world works. That's the way we've been evolved to work. If we can make the digital world behave more like the natural world, I think more people can be a part of the digital economy. So my moonshot is to say, can we reimagine digital work to be the way that humans want to work? And I think that's the big idea.
Thank you for being part of XRM Podcast. And to my listeners, if you like what you see in here, please press the subscribe button. Like always, I'm going to leave behind all the details of Mr. Tipatat down below so that you can get in touch, because this is about building a community and growing the AR/VR ecosystem together, because this is a fantastic technology. And so once it matures, I think it's going to be transformational. So thank you, Mr. Tipatat, for being part of XRM Podcast. Really appreciate it. To my guests, see you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Eddie. We're really glad to be a part of it.